Well, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome. My name is Louise Hyland, and I'm the Chief Executive of AMTA, the peak industry body for the Mobile Communications Association. Before we begin, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land on which we meet, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and pay respect to the elders past, present and emerging. I'm delighted to welcome you here today and welcome to the Minister. And we very much appreciate you making the effort to attend in person. We were determined after 2 years to have a live event with live food and real people. So we do appreciate you making the effort to be here today. And just in terms of background in COVID, we've all had to adapt, and today is no exception. Our plan A was to launch the report in February at Parliament House, but due to COVID restrictions, unfortunately that wasn't possible. So here we are today at a beautiful setting at the Mint to launch our report. And it's probably just as well, because when the report was coming hot off the press last night, I thought with hindsight we'd probably be ambitious to launch in February. I'm particularly pleased to see so many people from the communications industry, from government and indeed from other industries such as health, manufacturing, smart cities and small business here today. To begin, I'd like to introduce you to the Chair of AMTA, Trent Zinner. Trent is the Group Executive, Legal and External Affairs and Company Secretary at TPG Telecom. For nearly 25 years, Trent's been a lawyer and executive in mobile and fixed line businesses in Australia and the UK, working with brands including Hutchison, Telecoms, Orange, 3, Vodafone, and now TPG and iiNet. Trent's been instrumental in the development and launch of 3G, 4G and 5G networks and services. Trent joined AMTA as chairman last month. I'd like you to welcome him.
Thank you, Louise. Welcome, Minister, and thanks to John and Deloitte Access Economics for their work on this report, which forms an important part of AMTA and the mobile telecommunications industry platform for effecting important change on the adoption mindset in Australia when it comes to 5G. And I'm just going to put my glasses on so I can actually read my speech. This is my first official engagement for AMTA, having joined the board last month. We have board meetings coming up and other things, but it's a great honour to join after watching AMTA's great work from the sidelines for many, many years. So thank you everybody for joining us today. For those that are not familiar with AMTA, as Louise said, we are the peak industry body for Australia's mobile telecommunications industry. Our members include mobile network operators, MVNOs, network equipment suppliers, phone and device manufacturers, and many other suppliers to what is a very large industry in Australia. I don't need to tell any of you here in 2022 how important mobile phones have become in our lives. These days we literally can't work or manage our lives without them, and I was thinking, when you leave the house, I don't know what sense of panic you get when you leave your phone behind, but for me it's quite strong. But mobile networks do much, much more than enable the devices that we carry. They connect businesses all around Australia in metro and regional areas and provide new commercial opportunities for industries like agriculture and mining, now operating untethered to location and geographic restrictions. Mobile networks connect the world through machines and things, enabling critical access to financial, medical, corporate and lifestyle solutions and apps. The telco industry reinvesting in essential infrastructure at an annual rate is unmatched and often unrecognised by consumers, corporate and sometimes government. For example, between 2019 and 2020, the industry spent approximately $19.5 billion on essential telecommunications infrastructure, continuing to drive Australia's position as a leading edge provider globally. Of course, fixed line broadband will always be necessary to do the heavy lifting when it comes to data intensive applications, but as this report shows, it will be mobile technology, specifically 5G, that will accelerate the development of our smart cities, improve healthcare outcomes for patients, through smarter monitoring and boost productivity in agriculture and manufacturing thanks to advances in automation. The potential for new 5G applications and use cases for specific industries is enormous, and we will see them explode just as we did for 3G and 4G, which themselves felt like revolutionary technologies at the time when they were first introduced. So it's a very exciting time for our industry. One of AMTA's important strategic objectives is to promote understanding of the mobile industry and its contribution to Australia, and our Mobile Nation reports are a key way for the organisation to achieve that on behalf of our members. There have been 10 Mobile Nation reports commissioned since 2007. Over the years, they played an essential role in driving an understanding around the future of mobile communications in Australia, including providing statistics, insights and thought leadership to industry, government and customers to affect real change in the adoption mindset for these important technologies. The 2017 report reflected the potential of business with 5G. The 2019 report looked into the future of 5G, and in 2022, the year of 5G, as we call it, the report focuses on how fully to unleash 5G's potential for Australian businesses and consumers and drive economic growth. So I hope you enjoy the event today, and through this report and the activity we have planned around it, we hope to ignite a discussion on the more we can do to unlock the potential of 5G in Australia. Thank you very much, and I'll hand back to Louise.
Thank you, Trent, and we very much look forward to your contribution to AMTA. Next, I'd like to introduce the Minister for Communications, the Honourable Paul Fletcher. Minister Fletcher entered Parliament in 2009 as the member for Bradfield, and he was first appointed Minister in 2015, but ultimately becoming Minister for Communications, Cyber Safety and the Arts in May 2019, and appointed to his current role with an expanded portfolio, but including telecommunications in December 2020. Prior to entering politics, the Minister was a senior executive with Optus Communications, and we're very fortunate in our industry to have a Minister who not only has deep knowledge of the industry, but of the technology as well. Thank you, Minister.
Thank you very much, Louise, and thank you, Trent. I'll issue this disclaimer. In fact, like Trent, I'm a lawyer. So what we learn in these roles is how to hoover up information from the engineers and nod and sound knowledgeable and just recollect, just enough of the jargon to be able to get through those conversations. It's a very important skill. Very important skill. Look, this is a very important report, the 10th Mobile Nation report. I was slightly shocked to discover, since I've been involved in events to do with quite a few of them over the years, but this has been a really important initiative of the mobile telecommunications industry through its peak body AMTA, because it's about educating Australians, informing Australians about the economic importance of mobile communications, and just reminding people the way it has transformed and continues to transform the way we live, work, interact and do business. Because there can be a great tendency to take these things for granted, but older Australians, of whom now I increasingly count myself one, would recollect that there was a time before mobiles. I have this conversation with my 13-year-old son, he doesn't believe it, but there was a time before mobiles, and I say to him, if you're going to meet somebody in the city, you would say we're going to meet at 2 o'clock on the steps of Town Hall Station. And if one of you didn't get there on time, that was it, you didn't meet. It's just the way it worked. It's a shocking concept for younger people, but the fact is, in many ways, mobile communications have revolutionised our economy and society, and the exciting thing about 5G is that the revolution continues. So, look, I drew several things from this report. I want to touch on those, and I want to make then just a couple of points in response. I think the first point that emerges very strongly is the economic significance of 5G, the size of the prize, with your modelling suggesting $67 billion in GDP benefit, and an additional $27 billion if we can accelerate 5G take-up even further. What the report reminds us is what the Australian mobile communications sector has delivered to date, which is pretty impressive, with now 4,000 5G enabled base stations deployed around the country across all three of the mobile network operators. I was pleased too to see acknowledgement of the work the government has done in making spectrum available, the millimetre wave spectrum, the sub 1 gigahertz spectrum, both of those last year, 3.6 gigahertz spectrum and others, all enormously important in enabling and underpinning that rollout of 5G. And of course, when I acknowledge the work that industry has done, I should also acknowledge the billions of dollars that industry has spent in those spectrum auctions. So some very useful reminders in this report of the significance of 5G and what's been delivered. I want to say then, I think, two principal things in response to this report. The first is to make the observation that 5G, while very important, is not the only game in town when it comes to mobile communications policy. And then the second thing I want to touch on is what's a very strong theme in this report, which is what are the use cases and what is it that will motivate business in particular to take up 5G applications, business applications that motivate and justify the use of 5G. So to make the point that 5G is not the only game in town, there are, of course, a range of other very important policy priorities when it comes to mobile communications. I understand exactly why AMTA would choose to dedicate this report to 5G. I think that's entirely appropriate. But it is important to remind ourselves that, of course, amongst the other priorities when it comes to mobile communications are continuing to increase terrestrial coverage when we are still at only about 33% of our land mass of 7.7 million square kilometres where there is terrestrial mobile coverage. I'd argue, as I've argued publicly for quite some time, that an important way to facilitate increased coverage is greater use of network sharing, and you're obviously seeing the Morrison government strongly encourage that in a number of our funding programs to support increased rollout of mobile networks. And I think one other very important area to pick up the observation that Trent made, people get stressed when they don't have the phone with them. People get stressed when they don't have coverage. We've seen in the bushfires of 2019-20 and in the floods recently, when the mobile networks go down, there is a very strong imperative to get them back up again as quickly as possible. Government has been doing our bit to support those efforts with the STAND program, Strengthening Telecommunications Against Natural Disasters, funding longer lasting batteries or backup power in base stations. We know that a major factor in base stations and therefore mobile coverage going down in a disaster is the loss of power. And one of the things that I think we can take away from the most recent floods is, while of course we always want to see coverage back up as quickly as possible, and I know that every telecommunications industry professional wants to see coverage restored as quickly as possible. It goes against our grain as telco people whenever the network is not providing coverage. I think that some of the lessons of 2019-20, the bushfires, we've seen some positive developments from that. I'm thinking particularly of the power cubes being used by NBN to be able to restore services even before the power has come back on, and some of the other initiatives that we've seen. But there is, if we're honest, of course, there's more work to do. There is more work here to do. So if I then turn from that kind of short laundry list of some other policy priorities in the mobile space, let me come finally then to what I think is perhaps the key theme of this report, which is what are the use cases, what are the reasons that will drive businesses to be using 5G to get greater productivity, greater efficiency, to innovate in the way they do things. Now, the Morrison government came out with our 5G Innovation Initiative to specifically test and trial and incent the delivery of some of these new applications. And we very specifically did not go to the telcos. The telcos obviously have a very important role, but we sought applications from end users. I think, going to the same point that the report makes, what is it that will motivate end users to draw on 5G? And we got some really exciting innovative projects coming back. Some of them are mentioned in the report, such as the 5G enabled livestock counting, which is TPG. There's a 5G remote controlled firefighting tank. So this is Rheinmetall, the defence equipment maker, modifying one of their vehicles so that it'll have a drone sitting above it. And the idea is that the drone is better able to connect to the 5G network than if you're at ground level, a remotely controlled vehicle going into bushfires. If we can reduce the number of instances where human beings need to go into the intensely dangerous setting of a bushfire and instead can use remote technology to do this, that's a very, very desirable thing. And one of the other projects which is of great particular interest to me, with one of my other portfolio hats on, is Moorebank Intermodal, using 5G to enhance the control of the giant autostrad carriers that they use moving around the logistics park. And in particular, what it allows them to do is have 5G enabled cameras on all of those autostrads. Then there are some human operators sitting in a control centre at the side of the logistics park, but you can have more autostrads per human operator because of the high quality video feed that's coming in, showing exactly what those massive automated carriers are doing. So some really interesting initiatives coming forward. Of course, we've subsequently gone out with round 2 of the 5G Innovation Initiative, and I'm sure we'll see some other great ideas coming forward. And as the report rightly highlights, across sectors like transport, agriculture, resources, smart manufacturing and smart cities, the potential for 5G to support the delivery of objectives that businesses have in those sectors is quite profound. And I'll perhaps close with a couple of examples of things that we're doing in the cities space, which also falls within my portfolio responsibilities as Commonwealth Minister for Cities. One, as the report highlights, is that the Western Sydney City Deal, which is an important part of the transformation of Western Sydney with the new Western Sydney Airport, 20 billion plus of ground transport infrastructure investment, Western Sydney Parkland Authority, so 12,000 hectares being planned, the Aerotropolis, now called Bradfield, where there will be universities, TAFEs, and other major institutions. We're very keen to have 5G as a central part of the Western Parkland City, and so we've committed $2 million in particular from the next round of the 5G Innovation Initiative for projects particularly within the Western Sydney City Deal area, the 8 Western Sydney Council areas. And then just on Monday, I was with the Prime Minister and with the Premier and Deputy Premier of Queensland at the Gabba announcing the South East Queensland City Deal. One of the small quirks of being a politician is that you get to go onto hallowed sporting turf in circumstances where otherwise you'd need to train for 15 or 20 years to be good enough to get there. If you're a politician, you can turn up and you can hold a press conference on the Gabba, as we did. But the substantive point is that as part of the South East Queensland City Deal, there's 70 million for digital connectivity, of which 40 million is for better mobile broadband on trains, public transport corridors. So I'm convinced that 5G is going to be an important part of that. We want to be able to use this latest high bandwidth technology, which, as we know, has the advantage of low latency, high device density per base station, and higher speed. So very well suited to transport applications, smart manufacturing and other things. So it's going to be an important complement to some of the objectives we have for the South East Queensland City deal. And so I conclude by very much endorsing what I take to be perhaps the central observation of this report, which is to get the most out of 5G, we need to get end users and particularly businesses energised about how it can help them transform their businesses, do things better and more efficiently. That is an important purpose, and I congratulate AMTA on this report.
Thank you very much, Minister. Much appreciated. Comments. Before I introduce John Edmani, I'll just say a few words about the background to this report. It's really for AMTA. We commissioned this report as part of a larger strategic roadmap, which was designed to smooth the road for and drive the uptake of 5G, as we recognise how critical 5G is enabling Australia's economic potential. Now, over the years, AMTA's commissioned a number of reports at critical points in time and have been centred around Australia as a mobile nation. And these have added to the body of other analysis that has contributed to a number of quarters on the digital economy, on 5G itself over time. But in considering the role of this particular report, we were very conscious that with 5G and with the potential benefits, were not only to individuals and the economy, so they go beyond those of previous generations of mobile technology. In fact, the potential benefits span multiple industries, as the Minister just alluded to, where 5G is a key enabler of innovative applications, and it's through those industries' leadership in adoption of 5G that we can realise a multiplier effect of economic benefit for Australia. We recognise the need to look not only at economic analysis, but also look beyond that. And so we asked Deloitte to consider what's the level of business readiness for 5G, and how can we reach that broader audience, and then help them better understand the potential that's been created through this technology. And then being aware of those benefits, we then want to know, well, what's the plan? How do we develop a policy roadmap so that we have something that can be practically implemented? So it's not just findings, not just numbers of words, but actions. And I think you'll find it interesting and compelling and a bit of an eye-opener. And secondly, it's just, the point is that the telecommunications industry has invested considerably in the rollout of 5G networks, billions in fact over several years, to secure a global leadership position that represents the enormous opportunity for Australian businesses and industries. But there's no point having this opportunity unless the potential is realised. And now is the time for others to play a part. So the focus now for our industry is on two things. One, maintaining our position through continued focus through our industry. And two, taking the necessary steps to support other Australian industries to capitalise on the technologies that are enabled by 5G. And the role of industry and government in realising the potential by 5G cannot be overstated. So with that backdrop, I'd like to introduce you to John Edmani. John is a partner in Deloitte Access Economics in Sydney, who has led research with AMTA for over 10 years. John's econometric research has been published in the Economic Record and the Australian Economic Review. He's worked at the Australian Financial Review, in the University of Sydney's Faculty of Economics and Business for the New South Wales Government, and he served as Senior Economic Advisor for 2 Prime Ministers of Australia. Please welcome John Edmani.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks very much, Louise. It sounds like the Minister's got the key message from the research which we're launching here today. In the middle of conducting the research, I was having a chat to Innes Willens. He's the CEO of the Australian Industry Group, and we put the proposition to him, 5G, what does it mean for your members? And he furrowed his brow. He said, well, there's certainly a very significant opportunity from 5G to enable what he calls Industry 4.0 transformations, making the factories of the future But he said, to be honest with you, he levelled with us, he said, to be honest with you, if you were to ask most of our members about 5G, you'd probably see their eyes glaze over, or then say that it was a vague concept to them. And that anecdote sums up the message of 5G Unleashed, which is that there's a very significant opportunity, but there's a huge responsibility on government, on the telecommunications industry to better explain how 5G can be used in those use cases that the Minister spoke about. My mobile was going crazy this morning. I got seven or eight text messages from people saying, unfortunately, they'd be unable to attend today. We've got that next wave of COVID or close contacts that made it difficult for everybody to attend. So I said I'd email them a copy of the report and they could give me a summary of it later, just to test that they'd read it. I was hoping not to get a text message from one person in particular. Chris Lamont, the New South Wales Small Business Commissioner, acknowledged his attendance today. I think if I could have one person come along to today's report launch, it would be Chris, for us to be able to connect with the small business community and explain to them the benefits of 5G and what it can mean for their businesses would be a tremendous outcome from 5G Unleashed. So we've got 100 copies of the report outside, one for everyone here today, and Chris, you've got to carry 50 home with you, just by yourself, for some of your members and stakeholders. Obviously fantastic to have the Minister here generously sharing with us his time and thoughts about the research. Thank you very much, Minister. We've launched a few of these reports together over the years. I'm sure you're probably getting sick of them, particularly industry reports, which often conclude with a big to-do list for governments about what more governments need to do to help industry. But thankfully, Minister, you'll know that the punchline of 5G Unleashed, while it does have some humble policy recommendations, is not that governments need to do more. Actually, the main message is that businesses need to do more to drive 5G. Also acknowledge Trent Zinner. Thank you very much for commissioning us to do this latest wave of the research as well. I don't need to explain to this audience, the basic definition of 5G, the network, the devices, and how it will transform this country. It's a technology that isn't just faster download, more capability, greater reliability, and lower latency. If you were to ask a Deloitte consultant what it means, we would say it's a platform for business transformation. And you might say, what does that mean? It's about transforming our farms, our factories, our clinics, and our cities into being something very different from what we have today. As the Minister mentions, it's what TPG's doing, how it's helping farmers count sheep more cheaply than what they have to do by hand. It's what Optus is doing to help improve patient health by being able to track exercise remotely. It's what Nokia is doing in manufacturing, helping aircraft manufacturers repair their planes. It's what Ericsson is doing to transport vital medical equipment. It's what Telstra is doing to transform our cities. The latest technology in bike helmets to help reduce fatalities on the road. So the potential use cases of 5G are enormous. Now I know you've had 4 people today tell you that message. And say, why is this any different to other technology? And I think the punchline is this, it's that whereas for previous waves of mobile innovation, 2G and 3G and 4G, I think we've been able to largely rely on consumer use cases, personal use of mobile devices, and that has spread into our workplaces. And it's been something we can touch and feel. And where mobile connectivity alone has delivered a significant dividend. I think the step change for 5G is that the use cases are very industry specific. It's not just general connectivity and communications. It's different for factories, for farms, for mines, for offices, for plants. And for that reason, there's a much bigger awareness and education need to explain 5G. The other part of it is that for 5G, it's often not just the connectivity by itself that will transform businesses. Often, it will need to be connected with edge computing or with augmented reality technology, or with big data analytics, or some other broader driver of innovation. And unless those technologies and those innovations are driven together, well then businesses are unlikely to get the full dividend. And that's why it's important that we're here today. And our report is a salvo in trying to provide more information to help drive that campaign. But it wouldn't be an economics report without a few numbers in it. So now we get onto the really interesting part of today's conversation. Australia is a leader in mobile telecommunications. Investment in the network, take-up of handsets, leading policy. The Minister will know that Australia was one of the first countries in the world to release a 5G policy back in 2017. We're also one of the first countries to have a 5G economics report done by AMTA and by Deloitte in that same year. But the challenge is that other countries are also investing very quickly as well. So the forecasts show that Australia's position of this is just one metric, but it's taken up 5G devices, that we could slip from being third in the world amongst developed economies currently down to 9th over the next 3 years, and that position could worsen going forward. And it's not because we're going around and destroying network infrastructure and throwing devices in the bin, it's just that other countries will be investing and driving change faster. And if you think that the Korean businesses or German businesses or Finnish businesses are going to stand still so that Australia can stay at the front of the pack, then obviously the country is mistaken. As the Minister mentioned, very significant benefits, even at the current trajectory of Australia's take-up and use of 5G. But as the Minister mentioned, the dividend could be even more significant if we can maintain global leadership and keep on accelerating. So we come up with a figure of $27 billion, and you might think, oh God, 27, what's the difference between $27 billion and $270 billion? Let me give you this comparison. The Productivity Commission put out a report 4 years ago which summarised all the major economic reforms that could be done in Australia. And its modelling said the dividend for those would be $80 billion. So you think that's from 26 top priority economic reforms. And you think compared with that, $27 billion is a very significant benefit for the country. It's 40% more than what we will have by going on our current trajectory. So the dividend of action is obviously very significant. How do we come up with the numbers? Well, we've got to learn how to speak Greek for a beginning, to begin. So you'll see the model up here behind us. We always add Greek letters just to make it look more complicated than it needs to be. But it's less complex behind the scenes. We just come up with a index of how countries are performing with digital technologies. We look at different countries, we look at different data sources, and we come up with estimates for how mobile technology is contributing to economic growth. So I can have a little lecture after the session today, and we can go through it in more detail. I'm sure Ian Little from Telstra will be able to fire a few questions at me about the derivation of the equation. 2 more slides from me. Second last one is this, and this is about business perspectives on 5G. Yes, businesses understand there's a dividend. 71% recognise it's important for international competitiveness. 62%, it'll accelerate my business growth. We've spoken about the use cases, we know that's there. But 59% of businesses don't have a strategy for 5G. 30% don't have any intention of using it. And that figure is higher amongst small businesses and amongst businesses in regional areas. There's a big change that we're going to need to make to get businesses excited about 5G. Ask businesses why they're not using 5G. It's not a priority. I think that's a reasonable excuse last year or the year before during COVID-19 when businesses have had so much other transformation and reactive work to do to help their businesses survive. The Minister crowned last year, I think it was, the year of 5G. Well, if you'll be so generous, Minister, perhaps we could have another year of 5G, just to slightly improve our chances of take-up. The second barrier is around cost, and if businesses see 5G as a cost, well no, then take-up isn't going to go up. This needs proper business cases around the use cases that we've talked about to help justify the investment. 22% of businesses say it's not relevant for my business, which might be true in some areas, and particularly amongst businesses that aren't worried about going bankrupt and falling behind their competitors. Then certainly it may not be relevant for them, but for most businesses in most areas, we think there are pretty stunning use cases. A few humble policy suggestions that we have to conclude the report, 11 specific ideas around 3 general areas: driving adoption, spectrum allocation, and infrastructure. The government's 5G innovation initiative, fantastic. The only problem with it is that the money was used up incredibly quickly. There was supposed to be money for 3 rounds, I think, initially. It was all flushed out in the first round because there were so many good innovations that came forward. The government's announced more money for that. What we also suggest in the report is that government itself could be more of a model user of 5G as well. Think of the money spent in healthcare, the money spent in education. $5 billion a year at the Commonwealth level alone on IT, $200 billion a year spent on transport and infrastructure. If 5G more integrated with those offerings, then obviously that's going to provide businesses with a lot more tangible see, feel, touch and do use cases of 5G that could help turbocharge what businesses are doing as well. We also discussed the skill needs in this country to make the most use of 5G. It's another big subject in and of its own right. Australia has 800,000 IT workers. Australia wants to have 1.1 million IT workers by 2026. But if we've got 5,000 IT graduates a year and we've got modestly open borders for migrants, we will not get there. And that means that telco businesses won't have the engineering skills which they need to drive networks, and it means that businesses won't have the IT workers to help apply these applications as well. Spectrum allocation, many people in the audience will be familiar with some of the directions we have here. The government has done a good job in allocating spectrum, and the industry is asking for, I think it's 8 gigahertz of more spectrum by the end of this decade to help facilitate the rollout of networks. Infrastructure deployment, as a few people have mentioned these figures already, but across 4,000 sites, there are 7,000 individual 5G bits of gear from the 3 mobile network operators already rolled out in Australia. It's pretty hard with those figures to say that infrastructure deployment policy is a disaster. I mean, clearly it's effective enough for the infrastructure to be deployed, but we do have some modest suggestions in here about better coordination across different levels of government that will help facilitate the rollout, and as the Minister said, a big focus on regional areas. The Minister received the latest regional telecommunications review in December of last year. It had 12 recommendations. 6 of those 12 recommendations were about extending mobile coverage in regional areas. And whether that's direct funding, co-investment, tax subsidies or other options available to really support what's a very compelling case for extending mobile coverage in uneconomic areas. Clearly there's a case for that. That's why the government already supports it, already invests in that, and we're just saying that more could be done in that area as well. We finish off with a few observations about regulation, USO, and some other priorities there. So it's taking a copy today, but if we had one other ask of the troop we've pulled together today, if you could please share the report with some of your other contacts in industry and in telecommunications, it'd be great so we can get the message out about what an opportunity there is from 5G in this country. I think we're going to have a panel session shortly. Thanks very much, and I'll hand back to Louise.
Thank you, John. I think you don't need to read the report anymore. I think you got the full gamut there. But that was fantastic and very compelling, and we all the way through. I don't need to read the report now. So now we're going to have a panel discussion, which I'll facilitate. Yeah, great. Is it on? Yes. Well, Minister, I might start with you if that's okay. So, as John said, 2021 was the year of 5G. I noted in my speech to 2022, was it? We're right, it's going to be probably many more years of 5G. But my question is, what is your plan for the next 2 years as 5G rolls out and is completed, the 5G networks roll out? And do you think there are any recharge that could occur to the policy framework as the report suggests?
Well, Trent, the first part of my plan is to get re-elected, because that doesn't happen, and can't help with any of the rest of it. Second part of the plan is I take inspiration from Godzilla vs. Kong, the movie shot on the Gold Coast 2 or 3 years ago. Just on Monday we announced funding for Godzilla vs. Kong, the sequel. So yes, we will have a sequel to the year of 5G. Clearly there's an agenda and significant parts of it laid out in this report. To my mind, a fruitful area of opportunity is in other portfolios driving innovation that will naturally create demand for 5G. And so I talked about a couple of areas: the Southeast Queensland City deal, the Western Sydney City deal. With city deals, you're bringing together 3 levels of government, private sector partners, and then if you can overlay use of digital technology to support economic objectives, what follows from that will naturally be demand for the latest technology. So to give you one example, the very first building that's supposed to be built in the Aerotropolis, part of the, being built just to the south of Western Sydney Airport, is an advanced manufacturing sector, advanced manufacturing building, I should say. So that's an obvious place where you'd want to have very good 5G coverage from the outset. In the whole transport policy area, the potential for 5G is enormous. And one thing I've noticed is I was in the transport policy space from about 2015 to 2018, then left it, came back into the space late 2020 when the PM asked me to take back urban infrastructure in cities in addition to communications. What I noticed was that going back 3 or 4 years, a lot of the presentations from transport people about connected and automated vehicles did not talk about 5G. They talked about various weird bits of spectrum I hadn't heard of and various standards. That's now changed, and there's a lot of talk about 5G. That's obviously highly desirable because you want the scale benefits of very large numbers of people using 5G devices around the country, around the world, then making it much cheaper on a per vehicle basis to put to have the equipment. There are some great Australian companies like Coda Wireless in South Australia who are involved in the connected and automated vehicle space, and their customers include Cadillac and Volkswagen. The potential there, I think, is very significant. So, a long-winded way of saying, I'd see particular areas of potential in cities, in transport, certainly in health, in agriculture. I think policies to achieve the objectives in those sectors will naturally drive an appetite to use 5G.
Yeah. Louise, I can ask you a question. There's a lot covered in the report in terms of recommendations, but what do you see as the key priority if, in terms of government policy intervention, if we're to maintain our leadership in Australia with 5G?
Thanks, Trent. I think, look, it covers those 3 areas, which is spectrum, infrastructure, and the adoption of 5G. So with spectrum, AMTA set out a paper just before Christmas, but we've set a target of 8 gigahertz of allocated spectrum for IMT in the period out to 2030. And that's just not some figure that we made up. It's based on the analysis that we commissioned from Colliago, which looked at the demand for spectrum heading out to 2030 in the mid-band, and basically came to the conclusion that the current allocations will not meet that demand. So that's a key sort of plank. The second thing around infrastructure is, and I think, John, you referred to the coordination. Last year, AMTA published its Readiness assessment report, and that spanned looked across the state and territories of Australia at our planning regulations and looked for what was best practice. So it came up with 21 recommendations, and we're now advocating for those to be implemented. But key amongst those is we looked at New South Wales as a, if you like, a benchmark, and we would look for the ISEP exemptions to be rolled out across other states or adopted in other states of Australia. And thirdly, just in terms of the adoption, we very much appreciate and welcome the government's 5G initiative, both round 1 and round 2. And they are significant, and we're seeing really fantastic use cases being developed. But when I look overseas, and I see the UK as a government, as an early adopter of 5G, I do think that's critical. And most recently I was in Barcelona at World Mobile Congress, and we saw the Minister for Communications in Spain announcing a program, 4 billion euros, so about 6 billion Australian dollars, dedicated to fixed and 5G connectivity and digital infrastructure. So it's just the point that we've done really well, but other countries are also investing heavily in this space, so we need to keep up.
Great. And John, if I can ask you as well, I mean, the report highlighted, and you noted when you were speaking, a lack of business readiness for 5G adoption and the major threat that poses to realise the economic benefits we mentioned in the report. Why do you think there is such a high level of perceived, why is there such a level of barriers to 5G adoption, and what do you think we need to do to build that awareness and of potential 5G across the business sector?
Despite the negative comment about business readiness of 5G, we should say that it is still growing strongly. Last year, business use of 5G was at 11% of businesses, and then within a 12-month period, it had gone up to about 27% or so. So it is growing. It's just to say that there's obviously a lot more runway for adoption. And then there's about the exploitation of it, which is the use of 5G in business cases. Deloitte's phrase for this, not particularly memorable, is stackable use cases, which is to say that it's 5G connectivity plus edge computing, plus sensors, plus autonomous drones. It's plus other technologies that really allow businesses to unlock the benefits of 5G, and it's obviously putting them together, a more general innovation challenge that is really what's holding businesses back on 5G. The government had a good program a couple of years ago. It's called the Small Business Digital Champions Project. And what I really liked about it was that while it helped small businesses transform using digital technology, it also had this is one that went out of the industry department, not out of the communications department, but we can still take credit for it, Minister. It's digital, but it had a promotional element as well. So at the end of the use cases, they made videos and other collateral so it could tell many other small businesses about the benefits of digital transformation. So I feel like that's one other thing that could be adopted into the policy framework as well. That is baking in this promotion of what's being achieved with 5G, and that might help spread what's happening in the leading businesses and the piloting businesses across the country. I'd probably say that's an interesting idea, Minister, would you?
Very interesting.
And one more for you, John. What are the sectors, though, that you're seeing are leading the way in 5G that you've discovered in your report?
Look, what's most interesting about it is how I think the most recent waves of mobile technology have really benefited service businesses a lot, who are dealing directly with customers and also with businesses that have office environments where they want to make processes more efficient. What we see with 5G technology is these use cases have a bent towards, I think you might call them collectively traditional industries, that is with physical assets that occupy occupy large spaces, whether it's farms, factories, mines. That's where you're seeing the really big dividends from 5G. So we're certainly seeing some of the most innovative technology in those industries.
Great. Well, I might ask if there are any other questions from the room of the panel.
We have a roaming mic? Oh, we've got a roaming mic over there.
Mike is coming to you. If you maybe just say who you are.
Sure. Thank you. My name is Christian from NEC, and I just have a question to Paul, if I can, to have a bit of an understanding on what's the government view on Open RAN, and if the government would see this as a new form of technology to reduce 5G infrastructure cost, which would inherently increase the vendor ecosystem and probably accelerate the adoption, 5G technology adoption in Australia. Thank you.
Look, my general response to that would be that we want to encourage innovation. These kind of network architecture decisions are, properly taken by businesses and engineers and commercial people working together. But as a general principle, anything involving network sharing we like for a host of reasons. If it reduces the number of individual base stations or bits of kit on that have to be installed in heritage areas and generate some community concern, that's a good thing. If it reduces the total cost, that's a good thing. And if it allows greater physical coverage because of network sharing, rather than each network having their own unique facilities in every geography, that's also a good thing. But ultimately, these would be decisions made in the network design process by the private businesses that are building out these networks.
Thank you.
We have another question just here too. Another question here.
Thank you. My name is Zoro from Optus. My question is something that you mentioned is in the report, right? And that's a little bit of a dichotomy in this 5G rollout that we're facing. A lot of the investment in 5G is, as we talked about, getting the coverage out there. But a lot of the use cases are coming in the traditional sector, which are maybe in a regional area or a pocket of an area where private 5G now comes up. So I think my question is, because of the way the network's rolling out, did you see in your research how innovation will catch up in the services sector as well? Or you're foreseeing for the next few years, a lot more will remain in the traditional heavy industries?
I think it is expanding to services industries as well. It's a good question about where the network is and will those businesses use it as well. We are seeing overseas examples in the retail industry, for example. Businesses experimenting with trying to improve the customer experience inside their equivalents of Coles and Woolworths and elsewhere. Also in the office environment, or should I say, in the not office environment. And that is, how can 5G support the best hybrid working practices of the office dominated industries like professional services, where Deloitte is, like information technology, where Optus is, like the finance industry as well. Those industries are the ones that have the biggest experiment with remote working over the last 2 years. Has the experience been perfect? Well, obviously not in technology terms, and there is an opportunity there for 5G as well to support the best hybrid working policies as well. So we think that's going to happen over the next couple of years. That's right, spreading into service industries.
Any other questions on the floor?
This is a question to really anyone.
Who are you, Marcus?
Oh, sorry, yeah, sorry. Marcus Johnson, I work in the media and entertainment sector. I'm interested to anyone on the panel where there might be opportunities within the media and entertainment sector with 5G and whether the consumer take-up of 5G, particularly for the game sector, might help accelerate the business take-up.
Well, certainly we see the digital game sector as a significant growth opportunity for Australia. It's a $250 billion global industry. We're quite underdone in it. There's very vigorous consumption of digital games. I can say from working with my own 2 research assistants in this space, my 26-year-old stepson and my 13-year-old son. And we've got some fantastic game studios in Australia. I went to visit one just here in Castlereagh Street, I think, called Not Doppler, and their focus is on games on smartphones. Obviously, the big attraction for gamers of 5G is the very low latency. So, in short, yes, I certainly think 5G is a significant opportunity for games developers, and it's a good fit with the 30% tax offset we've now committed to for digital games development, which will take effect from 1 July this year. We think that'll really boost the sector, and we do think there'll be a number of players looking at 5G opportunities.
I might just add to that a little bit. I think in gaming as well, you can download or you can play live, and I think millimetre wave, low latency speeds closer to homes in areas where millimetre wave is rolled out would be a big boon for the consumer, therefore for the industry as well.
Alex Zardovoy from ITY.com. In a similar vein, does the report mention anything about the metaverse and 5G making those virtual worlds more realistic? I've seen these incredible 8K virtual reality prototype systems from Sony. There's a great video online, and the thing that they were promoting was that it was just incredibly realistic. It wasn't sort of the PS2 style, the console environment. And then with 5G, when it came out, there was a lot of over-promising and a huge amount of under-delivering. I mean, even 5G speeds, when I first tried using it over the past couple of years, I was getting sometimes faster speeds on 4G. And especially with uploads, 5G can be extremely slow compared to 4G. You just have to switch your phone to 4G to find out. So is there any, anything in this report about how close we are to 6G? There's already conferences and 6G associations, and the sort of things that will bring. That's supposed to come in the 2030s. I know we barely finished the 5G rollout, but have you looked even further down the track to what might be happening in that space?
It's a great question and great comments as well. The report doesn't do that. And the feeling at the scoping stage for the report was that the bigger job was talking to businesses in existing sectors at the moment and a huge opportunity for them to transform to get the most out of 5G. Another report about what could be done on the edge, what can be done more future-looking amongst startup businesses in some of the the nascent sectors you're speaking about, or 6G. That's a great report too. I mean, that's a really good one to do as well. But now this one is a bit more about what can existing businesses do to transform and drive efficiency.
Any other questions? With that, Louise, I think we might say some closing remarks.
Yeah, thanks, John. Thank you, Trent, and thanks to our panel speakers, and thank you to the Minister. Thank you all for attending today. As I say, it's great to have you here in person, and again, apologies to those people who have sent theirs apologies due to COVID. We literally, and I'm sure all of us are facing it, are either close contacts of someone or people, even in our team, in the AMTA team, we've had 2 people come down with COVID this week. So I'd like to acknowledge, first of all, the AMTA members for their contributions to this report. Some might think it's easy to get industry aligned. I can assure you it's not. So it does require concerted effort, and if Rod Sims ever has any questions about competition in the mobile industry, he's welcome to come to any of our committee meetings. I want to thank the broader AMTA team, 2 members who can't be here today, one who effectively organised this event and another who was instrumental in working with Deloitte on the report, Lisa and Amanda. And as we look towards the upcoming election, AMTA and the industry will carry on advocating for continued uptake of 5G so the benefits can be realised for all of Australia. But I'd particularly like to thank John from Deloitte and his team. They've really worked tirelessly to bring this report to life, and we'll be working tirelessly in the months to come to see that the policy agenda is advocated by AMTA. Thank you.